Hey everyone. I'm sure you've all seen me making a lot of posts recently, if you don't have me blocked or unfollowed. And I've been getting a number of questions about why I think people should pay for social media and so forth. And so I wanted to do a little bit of a background and just tell some of my story and where I'm at and what I think this means and where I think it's going. My name's Wiz. Some of you know me as Eben. I'm 48 and I'm coming to you from my mother's house. I have been struggling, fighting, relaxing, loving, not caring. I've been doing about everything anyone could imagine to find creative financial stability for my entire life. I went to a very good college. I graduated with fine degrees. When I graduated, I had no desire to pursue a traditional career. I waited tables. I was a bike messenger for a while, and that was in the early '90s. And I ran around and listened to a lot of music in Seattle in the early '90s, and drank a lot of beer and did all the great stuff that young people do. Eventually, I founded a little graphic design firm and taught myself graphic design and kind of translated I had a studio minor, so I had a degree in painting. Um, I translated that into commercial art, and that paid the bills for a while. I did well. I had international clients and so forth. But I got super depressed. I was clinically depressed. I forget the grades they give it or whatever, but I was the worst, grade 4 or something, depression, chronic, severe depression or something. I had therapists and all that. And I was getting checks for $20,000, so uh, it didn't make much sense to me. And all my friends were buying houses and stuff like that. I was like, oh, this isn't quite where I'm going to end up. So my business failed in the mid '90s, or just fell apart. It didn't really fail; it fell apart. Um, and I just let it fall apart because I was too depressed to try to put it back together. But since then, I've been kind of, the way I describe it is there's a chasm in my life between commerce and creativity, and I've been climbing back and forth in that chasm, trying to make a bridge. Um, Sometimes on the commercial side and sometimes on the creative side. So after my commercial business fell apart, I went and wrote a book called The Love Artist. And when I was writing it, I said, well, if I price this the same way that I wrote it creatively, I say, I know there's not much of an audience for it, but the people who do read it, it can influence other books. It's not a Nirvana book, but it might be the Pixies book. So if I'm the Pixies and I price my album at $10, then I just go broke and sit at home and get another job. If you're Nirvana, you can price your album at $10 and you can tour the world. But if you're the Pixies, you have to price your album at $40 because you're going to influence Nirvana. And everyone who listened to the Pixies back then, they influenced tons of bands and they meant a ton to everyone who heard them. And they still do. So I came up with the idea of charging $120 for my book. I didn't have the guts to charge $120 for it originally, so I charged $40, which kind of confused people, I think. They were like, well, whatever, dude. Didn't sell many. Couldn't get it published. I published it myself. But that started me down the road of years and years of thinking what creative content is worth, why is it worth something, and why would something like the Pixies, which spawned Nirvana, be more valuable than Nirvana, which more people wanted, right? Because all our creative content has flat pricing. So all our songs are 99 cents. or $1.29 or 69. All our books are $14.99. All our movie tickets are $12. Right? That's all flat pricing. In a car, if you're selling a better car, or you put more work into it, or you use higher quality materials, you get a higher price. Or socks, or ball bearings, or blue jeans, or whatever. If you put more effort into it, and if you know more about what you're doing and you care more about it, then you're speaking to a smaller audience. Ferrari is speaking to a smaller audience than Honda is, and you're speaking to enthusiasts, so you charge an enthusiastic rate. You charge an enthusiast's price. Well, Pixies are for enthusiasts, but they don't charge an enthusiast's price. So they just go broke. But they're doing it for the kids and a whole bunch of other reasons. They get to be authentic or whatever. For a while that worked, but now it's burning people out. And some of the people who are making the best music and some of the people who are making the largest contributions to culture they've always been killing themselves, but they're also exhausted, have chronic fatigue syndrome, they're having health issues and having to do Kickstarters and so forth. And the digital revolution hasn't helped us at all. It's kind of accelerated it. A lot of people just download music for free these days. So I went back and forth and thought about content pricing a lot, and my first thought to myself when I said I'm going to charge $120 for a book was, what are you, stupid? How dare you? That's absurd, blah, blah, blah. And so I fought myself for years and years and years. And while I was fighting myself, I was also trying to put my life together. After I wrote the book, I did some paintings. Those didn't work. Then I did some odd jobs, some house painting and some manual labor and so forth, and that sucked and didn't make me any happier. I also did some music. So I've gone back and forth. And my background in design, I was a professional, and I was working with international brands. I worked with Nirvana, I worked with Sub Pop, I worked with Smith Sport Optics, who makes the ski goggles and sunglasses. I worked with NBC. I did a little bit of stuff for David Letterman's show and the Late Show or something, some show that came on after Letterman. I did a little bit of stuff for Henry Rollins, Atlantic Records, a million tiny little bands. I worked with Ebbets Field. Anyway. So I had, I was a full-blown professional in the graphic design world, advertising world. So I felt like I was a valuable human being, and all my friends who had similar levels of experience were making high 5 figures or 6 figures. And I had the same drive and ambition as they did, but I didn't really have any way to do that. So I kept studying it, and I started. At a certain point, finished my book and finished my paintings, and I was literally exhausted. So I started with depression. Then I wrote a book. Then the book didn't sell, and it took me about 5 years to write the book and put it out. And so I was completely depleted, and this was in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so I moved from Seattle, where I'd been living essentially off of borrowed money, and I moved to Chicago, and I moved in with my mother, and I was like, okay, screw this, enough creativity, enough fucking around. I'm just a 35-year-old guy living with his mom, so it's time just to get a job. And I looked for jobs managing apartments and doing graphic design again, since I was a nationally recognized whatever. Tried to start a consulting business, tried to do all this stuff, and literally nothing would take. And I started getting really frustrated, and I started looking into, again, I was always staring at the gap between creativity and commerce. So I started writing about it, and I wrote a book called Untangibles. And what I found was that we appear to be on the precipice of a content revolution, if you will. Um, Let me back up just a little bit. I was a history major. I said I was a studio art minor. I was a painting minor, but I was a history major in college. And all I studied, all I cared about was revolutions, how culture changed, the history of ideas, stuff like that. So I was fascinated by that, and I have a pretty good grasp on kind of what things have done historically in Europe or in Latin America, whatever. So I started to look into how the economy changes, and specifically how we change from valuing one type of activity or one type of work to another. And what I found blew me away, because before that I'd always been like, oh, we should really pay these great artists lots of money and they should be happy. Like before then it was just kind of like a very creative idea that this should be happening or this would be fun or whatever. And when I started looking into it, I realized that things were following a fairly predictable pattern. And let me describe the pattern to you. 400 years ago, no one was getting paid. Not only were people not getting paid for creative work, people were not getting paid for intellectual work or reasoned work. Now, in the economy, they have words to describe what type of labor something is. So physical labor, or selling a physical product, that's called the tangible economy. And tangible just means something you can touch, something you can feel, something you can measure. It's very straightforward. So 400 years ago, the entire world economy was a tangible economy, and it grew incredibly slowly. And this is all just historical economic data. When the world economy was a tangible economy, right? That's when people had to move bricks to make money or build something out of stone with very few machines. The economy grew at about 0.22% a year, and that's the GDP, global GDP, gross domestic product. And basically, if you wanted your economy, okay, if I'm the king of Rome or whatever, and I want my economy to grow faster than 0.22% a year, what are my options? Essentially, my options are to go to war and steal things from other people. And Rome would do that not infrequently. They would go on a rampage and they would steal bricks, they would steal supplies from other people, and that was pretty much the only way to grow more quickly, is to go out and take stuff from people. And so life was gross. Life was very violent and abusive in a lot of ways, and it wasn't cute, and there were people who were serfs or indentured servitude, indentured servants, or slaves. And that was the experience for most people, was a very challenging one. And so at that time, when the economy was tangible, you probably had 1 or 2% of the people who were living a prosperous life. But even then, those people, those kings and nobles and rich merchants and so forth, they didn't have, remember, they didn't have any toilet paper, they didn't have soft underwear, they didn't have many windows or very good heat, they didn't have toilets, they didn't have refrigeration, they didn't have cars, they didn't have dental work, a lot of times they didn't have glasses, or anything to read. So they're still living an experience that would be foreign even to someone who's fairly poor in a developed nation today. So, but they were above everyone else, and they had power, and they could kill people and so forth. So in the tangible economy, there was about 1%, 2% of the population that had autonomy and prosperity. So the powerful was about 1 or 2% of the economy, of the world population. Now, during that economy, reasoned labor, science, was demonized. And if you look in Europe, there is an attitude towards science and exploration because it was anti-church. Not only did the church persecute science and kill scientists and jail scientists, but families, communities, societies persecuted science and reason. No one valued book learning. The first book that when the printing press was created, the first book that anyone wanted to print was the Bible. It wasn't a math book. It wasn't maps. It was a Bible. And if you were doing much studying besides the Bible, you're probably an outcast. People might call you a witch or an alchemist or a wizard. You might get killed for it. Even some of the top scientists, Galileo, Kepler, all those guys, they were persecuted. A lot of times they would not share the results of their inquiry and their study until they were almost dead. And that was to protect their family. That was just to stay safe. So when you have a society that's that repressive around intellectual or reasoned activity, knowledge grows very, very slowly because you can't share information. You can't write it down. You can't print it. You can't give it to your colleagues. You can't work with other people. You can't really communicate about it. So there really was no, and in economic circles, that type of activity, intellectual activity, figuring stuff out, designing stuff, reasoning stuff, that's called intangible activity. So tangible activity is something physical that you can touch. Intangible activity is something that you can't touch quite as much, right? You can't touch an idea. You can touch a building. A building comes from an idea. So you can touch the building once it's made, but you can't touch the idea for the building. You can describe the building and you can inspire someone. You can draw it even, and then you can touch the paper. But the idea for the building exists separate from all that. So an interesting thing happened right around the time of Einstein, right around the 1880s or so, right around 1900. What happened is, after hundreds of years of repression and fear around intangible activity, right? The church had been suppressing intangible activity forever. And then what happens in the late 18th century is it explodes almost overnight. And what happens is the market becomes sophisticated enough that it starts to value intellectual activity and book learning. So what you get is this explosion of inventions, this explosion of knowledge. You get, and in a very short time, you get the discovery of oil and then the subsequent refining of oil. You get lights, first oil and then electric lights. You get the internal combustion engine. You get mass-produced bicycles. You get the assembly line. You get cars. You get refrigeration. You get the foundation for our modern existence and our modern economy. And that all happens in a very short window. There's a 40-year window or so, 1880 to 1920, where everyone's just throwing new inventions at the world, and the world is just sucking them up as quickly as they can, and first in developed nations and then globally. So what happens is, after maybe 10,000 years or whatever of this incredibly slow economic growth, 0.22% a year, what happens is that almost overnight it ramps up by a factor of 10. So starting at about 1880, if you look from 1880 until now, the world global GDP grows at about 2.2% a year, 10 times. Just from adding, essentially what we did is we had a one-cylinder economy, a one-cylinder global economy that was only tangible activity. As soon as we added intangible activity, thinking, management, book learning, design, invention, advertising, as soon as we added all these things to tangible activity, we increased our economy by a factor of 10, which is unheard of. If you told any economist you could increase the economy by a factor of 10, they'd say you're an idiot. They'd say if you told them you could increase a single company by a factor of 10, they'd probably say that you're delusional or just dumb. But here we did it with the entire world in an incredibly short period of time by adding another cylinder on top of the cylinder that we had, right? We have a tangible economy. Now let's add an intangible economy. Those two work together and become integrated, and it's off to the races. Entirely different world. And what happens is that we go from about 1% of the population being rich and autonomous and having power and prosperity to today 50% of the world's population is autonomous and has power and has prosperity. And those 50% have things that 1% in the tangible economy never could have contemplated. Like the ones I mentioned before. We have soft underwear. We have beautiful face creams. We have, glasses that don't even have hinges on the side. You can get LASIK surgery. You can get root canals. You can get a Ferrari. You can go online. Everyone can use Facebook for free. I have a video camera on my phone that I'm using right now. That's unheard of. So, but as we all know, we're not at the end of the story, because we have half the world fed and computered and with energy and food and heat, but obviously the other half does not have access to that yet. And it's looking more and more, with a two-cylinder economy, tangible and intangible, it's looking more and more like that we can only feed half the world. We can only empower half the world, and that half the world has to be servants or slaves or broke or angry or trying to sneak across borders to get to some place where they can make money. Desperate on some level. So, what we have to ask ourselves is if there's not another cylinder that we can add to our two-cylinder economy to ramp it up. And if there is another cylinder, what kind of gains will it give us to the current economy? Can we expect another tenfold increase in what we're doing from adding one more cylinder? Or is that unreasonable? Now, I'll pause here because a lot of people are intimidated by growth. A lot of people, the environmental movement and a lot of progressives have really come to demonize growth over the last 40 years or so. They say that multinational corporations are the root of our problems and so forth and so on. And there's no doubt that multinational corporations and that modern capitalism or the economy, whatever you want to call it, has some massive challenges. It doesn't have much of a heart. It really runs over people. It has a tendency to wipe out indigenous culture. It has a tendency to steamroll children, marginalized people. It doesn't really care. It's starting to care a little bit, but its tendency is to care because caring is good PR, and that's not enough. So, back a little bit to my story. I felt like, in my life, I was hitting against a brick wall continually. And I related very profoundly to the Teslas of the world, the Galileos. I felt like what I was put on this earth to do wasn't desired or wasn't allowed. But there wasn't a church oppressing me. I was oppressing me. The standards of my community was oppressing me. My fears were oppressing me. My economy was oppressing me. It wasn't someone saying, don't be creative. It was the economy saying that if you're creative, all you can do is appeal to 18 to 36-year-olds and sell pop songs. That's the only way to make money. Or tour incessantly. Because I didn't want to tour incessantly. I didn't want to go around singing and blah, blah, blah. I wasn't even... the stuff that I created, that wasn't the audience for it. I wasn't going to go in and open up for Jay-Z for 2 years and then headline some arena. That's not what I was going to do. My book was not going to sell, 10 million copies in the first year. That's not what I was doing. I had an audience, but the audience was fairly small and incredibly sophisticated, in my estimation. And I felt like I could communicate with that audience, but there was no precedent to communicate valuably with that audience. There was no precedent to sell a book for $40 or $120. Now, all these people who would have bought it, my friends, we're all wearing $220 blue jeans. We all have $400 eyeglasses. We take $5,000 vacations. We have $100,000 jobs. Some of my friends are millionaires. Like I said, I went to a very good college. My friends are incredibly smart. They run Fortune 500 companies. They run underground, or not even underground. They run influential, world-changing record labels. They run skateboard companies. They do graphic design. They're lawyers. They're experts in their field. They work in nonprofit. They buy apartments in Brooklyn. They buy houses in Seattle. They rehabilitate neighborhoods in Chicago. So there's no precedent for this. And so I ended up basically doing what I'm doing now, which is just begging for money and pleading my case that this is what my labor is worth. And I have reasons, but ultimately it comes down to belief. The difference between tangible and intangible, and the third aspect, which is creativity, which is untangible. The difference between intangible and untangible is that intangible activity is linear. You have an idea, you have an end that you need to fill. I have a car that I have to mass produce, so I need to invent, I need to design an assembly line. Untangible activity is creative activity. You don't know what you're going to come up with. You sit down, you take the time, and you create something. You paint a painting, you make some content, you make a viral video. When people sit down and try to make a viral video, it's usually not as good as the ones that just happen, because the people are like, oh, this is going to be awesome. And this is what untangible activity, this is what we all have on our brilliantly, intangibly designed phones and tangibly produced phones. This is content. And in the software world, there's a saying that Bill Gates and the richest people in the world say, and that is, content is king. Because over time, the price for someone to code software, right? First you have to have someone write custom code for software. And then you get someone who writes software tools, and you get someone who just compiles those tools to make things. And then you get people writing code that assembles code for you. Tangible and intangible activity is primarily becoming automated. So people who are on welfare have smartphones. That's not that big a deal. That's not a crazy idea. Some of them don't. Some of them do. Some of them have cars, you know? So what's lacking right now is untangible content. It's things that people want to watch. Things that will rivet them to the screen. Now, you ask, because you're smart, we have things that we all want to watch. We have stories, we have television, we have viral videos. What changes when you pay for it? Why should I pay for something I feel like I'm already getting for free? I already have people writing songs. I already have people dancing dances. I already have cat videos, blah, blah, blah. Why should I pay for it? What do I get when I pay for it? What you get when you pay for it is a better product, period. You get what you pay for. You are what you eat, and you get what you pay for. In the 1970s or 1980s, people would have asked the same thing about blue jeans, right? In the 70s, all blue jeans were $24.95. You could have anything you want as long as it was Wrangler, Levi, or Lee. Same with coffee. You could have any coffee you wanted. It was $5 a pound, as long as it was U-Ban, Maxwell Brothers, or no, U-Ban, Maxwell House, or what was the other one? Sanka or something. But it was all the same. In the 80s and 90s, what happened to blue jeans and coffee and a whole lot of other tangible products is that everyone had the basics, right? Everyone had a pair of Levi's, everyone had a cup of Sanka. And a couple entrepreneurs said, I'm going to make a superior product and I'm going to charge more for it, right? Gloria Vanderbilt said, I'm going to make a pair of designer blue jeans that are better than Levi's, and I'm going to charge 3 times what Levi's charged. I'm going to charge $80. And everyone went crazy, and everyone called them yuppies, and it was horrible, and the world was going to hell. And here we are, 40, 30 years later, and you can't find, if someone's wearing a pair of $24 jeans, they're from Old Navy, and no one cares about them. I wear $100 jeans, and those are cheap. I have punk rock friends who, have Prada glasses and wear $250 blue jeans, and that's not crazy. No one calls them yuppie. No, that's fully acceptable. Because their standards have changed. They want a more personable, they want a specific fit. They want a specific fabric. They want it constructed a certain way. Maybe they want it constructed in a certain country. Maybe they want it constructed in the US, or they want it constructed in Japan. That's what they want. So if you look at content right now, we're in the 1970s of content, and that's hard to imagine because we have a lot of content everywhere. But it's important to remember that they had a lot of blue jeans everywhere in the 1970s, and they had a lot of coffee everywhere in the 1970s. No one thought we had a shortage of blue jeans in the 70s. No one thought we had a shortage of coffee. Then came Starbucks. And everyone was like, oh, I guess we didn't really have the coffee we wanted. And now, of course, no one even goes to Starbucks because they're not cool enough. If you're really in the know or whatever, you go to Terra Fazione or Stumptown or Intelligentsia. You get these premium brands that are competing, that they're using Starbucks profit or price point, but they're delivering different brand values, different product quality. And that's what's going to happen with content. We don't know what a $6 song looks like yet. We can hypothesize that some of our favorite songs may not be $1.29 songs. They may be $4 songs that are getting sold for $1.29. And now you're going to say that people won't pay that, but people will just steal it. You're wrong. I'm just going to say it. You're wrong. People steal songs because they're so cheap. People steal digital content because it's so cheap.